Fort Granite lay drowned in smoke and stillness after the siege. Wrecked vehicles littered the yard, radios hissed with nothing, and the wounded sat propped against a shattered wall. Through the haze came the bark of General Marcus Ellery's voice. "Any Apache pilots here?" he shouted. No one moved. The woman everyone knew only as a mechanic, grease-smeared, quiet, nearly invisible, set her wrench down and stepped toward the waiting gunship. No announcement, no pause, just a calm stride that cut through the ruin. If you know real skill doesn't need rank, type flight now. Captain Mira Holt had been at the forward outpost for months, officially just another name under aviation maintenance, the unglamorous backbone of the helicopter line. Her coveralls carried the permanent scent of oil and hydraulic fluid, and her hands moved with the kind of instinct that came from years around torque specs and assemblies most people never even thought about, as long as their birds kept flying. Every day, pilots walked past her bay, swapping jokes about wrench monkeys, brushing dust from their flight suits that marked them as elite in the base pecking order. To them, she was just part of the background, the reason their rotors spun and their engines ran, but not a person worth remembering. Even in the mess hall, she sat on the far edges, close enough to hear their talk, but never part of it. She didn't take the distance as punishment. Silence was easier than explaining a past that couldn't appear on any personnel file. The fewer questions, the better. To the rest of maintenance, she was simply the one who clocked in early, worked clean and fast, and slipped out again without joining in their jokes or smoke breaks. She fixed what broke, prevented what might fail, and logged every detail with precision that hinted at training far beyond what her role demanded. When the siege began, mortar shells incoming, small arms fire ripping across the perimeter, a full-scale coordinated assault, pushing Fort Granite past anything it had faced before. Her usual quiet became something operational, something vital that few noticed amid the chaos. While explosions shook the hangars, Captain Mira Holt worked the ruptured fuel lines with steady hands, never flinching as dirt and shrapnel rained down where others ducked for cover. She dragged supply crates into makeshift walls, forming barriers to shield the parts and tools they'd need if the base somehow lasted through the night. No one stopped to thank her. There's no room for compliments in survival mode. Her movements simply melted into the frenzy of people doing whatever they could without waiting for orders or permission. By nightfall, the enemy finally pulled back, leaving Fort Granite battered and half alive. Of the Apaches parked along the flight line, not one had a living pilot left fit to fly. Some were dead, others had been airlifted out, broken and burned. The next morning, through the thick smoke and ringing silence, General Marcus Ellery's voice cut through like a blade. "Any qualified Apache pilots present?" he called. Silence met him back. Everyone knew the answer before he asked. The roster was gone, and those machines weren't toys anyone with a license could fly. Mira didn't ask permission or explain herself. She just stepped away from her workstation, wiping her hands on the rag clipped to her belt, the same hands still slick with oil from an engine she'd been tuning minutes earlier. The hangar went dead quiet, heavier than the smoke curling through the cracked beams above. People who'd never looked twice at her before started whispering, voices edged with confusion and disbelief. "She's just a mechanic. What the hell's she doing?" A few uneasy laughs slipped out, as if they expected the general to shout and send her back where she belonged in the chain of command. But instead of stopping her, General Marcus Ellery froze, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. There was something about the way Captain Mira Holt moved that didn't look like guesswork or panic. It was memory, precise, rehearsed motion born from experience far beyond what anyone around her could imagine. Years in the field had trained Ellery to spot the gap between someone faking confidence and someone who truly knew their craft. As she climbed into the Apache, it wasn't the awkward scramble of an amateur. It was the calm return of someone stepping back into a place that once felt like home. Her hands glided over switches and panels with unthinking rhythm, movements sharpened by countless hours inside similar cockpits. Every motion was lean, deliberate, refined by repetition until instinct replaced thought. The general's eyes narrowed, realization settling in as he watched her flow through the pre-flight sequence. "Where did you train on Apaches?" he finally asked, but his tone made it sound like confirmation, not curiosity. He wasn't discovering something new. He was seeing what he should have known all along. Mira didn't answer. Her focus stayed locked on the checklist. Fuel, hydraulics, weapon systems, everything done in exact sequence. She pulled the priming lever, and the turbines rose with that high, haunting whine that only an Apache makes when it comes alive. Outside, soldiers turned their faces from the swirling dust, staring as the machine they'd written off as dead came roaring back to life under her hands. A young lieutenant broke the tension, his disbelief cutting through the wind. "She can't possibly be certified to—" But the words vanished when the HUD lit green across the canopy, systems aligned, and the helicopter lifted smoothly off the tarmac. Gasps rippled through the hangar, even over the roar of the engines. They were watching something that defied the order of things. A mechanic flying a gunship without permission, without credentials, without hesitation. Yet the control was perfect, steady, real. For the first time since the siege began, the silence wasn't about fear, it was awe. They were seeing proof that the person they'd ignored had been carrying something extraordinary all along. Skill that didn't need words, reputation, or paperwork. Just action. And that kind of quiet skill, it changes everything. If you've ever proved them wrong without saying a word, type respect now. At the far edge of the valley, enemy forces regrouped, their confidence swelling after reports confirmed Fort Granite's skies were clear. Intelligence had told them every helicopter pilot was gone. No gunships, no air cover, no threat from above. They prepared for one final push, convinced the base would fall with the next assault. Then the ground began to hum. That deep, pulsing tremor, every soldier who'd seen combat knew the sound. Heads turned upward as dust lifted from the earth, and across the dawn light, the shape of an AH-64 Apache tore over the ridge, blades slicing the morning air with brutal precision. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mira Holt, Ironbird to no one but herself, handled the controls like she'd never left them. Her fingers danced over the collective and cyclic, weapon screens glowing green as she locked targets through systems she clearly knew by heart. Every motion was practiced, exact, the kind of mastery that only comes from thousands of hours in combat, not training simulators. The first rockets screamed off the rails, streaking toward the enemy's weapons cache. A second later, the ridgeline erupted. Flames, shockwaves, and fragments tore through bunkers and supply trucks, setting off a chain of detonations that lit the valley like sunrise. The enemy's formation collapsed instantly. Their organized advance turned into chaos under an air assault they'd sworn couldn't happen. Down below, SEALs and infantrymen on the ground stared in disbelief, pointing skyward, shouting through the noise, half laughing, half crying. Their radios came alive with overlapping calls. everyone demanding confirmation of what their eyes already knew. The Apache banked hard, cutting low through smoke and treetops, its movements sharp and fearless. Mira flew with the kind of instinct that only comes from living through more battles than anyone should. These weren't training maneuvers. They were survival patterns, built to hit hard, vanish fast, and strike again before anyone could react. Every burst of fire bought the defenders another minute of life. Every precision hit carved safety out of chaos, tearing apart the positions that would have buried them by sunrise. Her aim wasn't random, it was surgical. She wasn't just fighting, she was dismantling their offense piece by piece, turning the battle before anyone had time to understand what was happening. She dismantled their command structure one strike at a time, cutting out the core of their offense with the precision of a surgeon. To the enemy watching from shattered trenches, it must have felt unreal. Air power they had sworn destroyed rising from the smoke like a phantom. They had confirmed it, documented it. Fort Granite's helicopters were gone. And yet, here it was, tearing their assault to pieces with impossible accuracy and the calm fury of someone who'd done this before. Their intelligence had been flawless, their conclusions fatally wrong. On the ground, friendly troops finally understood what they were seeing. The mechanic they'd ignored for months was flying circles around death itself, saving every soul still breathing on that base. Captain Mira Holt wasn't improvising. She was operating at a level most seasoned combat pilots never reached. Hours passed before her rockets and rounds ran dry. Then, with the same steady control she'd shown in the air, she turned the Apache back toward Fort Granite. The landing was a masterclass. Smooth deceleration, hover locked in against the crosswind, and a touchdown so soft it barely stirred the dust beneath the skids. It wasn't luck. It was discipline carved from years of repetition. As the turbines wound down and the rotors slowed to silence, soldiers gathered around the pad without being told. Security protocol said stay in cover, but no one could move until she finished her shutdown checklist, every motion exact and methodical. Dust spiraled around their boots, but all eyes stayed fixed on the cockpit. General Marcus Ellery stood off to the side, the weight of realization settling on his face. Relief mixed with respect, and something deeper, the quiet sting of having never really seen her before now. He didn't salute. This moment didn't need ceremony. Instead, he simply stepped back, clearing her path. A small act that said more than any medal or speech ever could. The soldiers who'd barely noticed her before now stood at rigid attention as she walked past. Tears streaking faces that only hours ago had accepted death as inevitable. She hadn't asked for their respect. It came unspoken, earned through truth laid bare. Her skill, her calm, her quiet defiance of every assumption, they spoke louder than rank ever could. Mira Holt moved with the same steady pace as always, heading straight for the maintenance hangar. She picked up the rag she'd dropped before the battle, clipped it back to her belt, and went right back to being the mechanic no one really saw, at least not until today. She didn't speak to them, didn't nod or smile. She offered no explanation for a past that most files would never record. Later, when the reports made their way through command channels, General Marcus Ellery added a quiet note that didn't fit the official format. Qualified pilot identified and deployed during crisis. Mission survival directly attributed to her actions. Recommend full review of personnel for unlisted qualifications. Weeks later, word of her spread through the network. The story of the mechanic who took the sky when no one else could. who turned disaster into survival through skill no one had thought to ask about. The legend grew on its own, whispered in hangars, retold in mess halls, shaping how others saw the silent and the overlooked. Mira never sought attention or glory. She went back to her post. Same coveralls, same rhythm, same silence. But every time an Apache spun up on Fort Granite's line after that, people paused. For a breath, they remembered the day the sky came alive because of her, the day quiet competence saved them all. The event became a lesson burned into memory. Never underestimate the unseen. Sometimes the strongest hands are the ones that never ask to be noticed. Some stories don't need noise, only proof. If you honor silent strength, subscribe now to Old Bill's Tales. What's wounded you is your duty, and what saved you was her silence.